Right. Who would like to start off?
Sorry, Nicola Ramsden, the Bear trustee. Sorry, can you hear me in the back?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you that was an absolutely fascinating survey of the way you can see changes in attitudes through the artists themselves, that the writers in particular I have in mind here. And I wanted to ask specifically on the writers, how much there is to learn from the critical reaction to works of literature that reveal, explore, challenge taboos, and can you learn anything from the evolution of the critical reception to these works? Has that changed over time?
Yeah, it's a very good question, but unfortunately I think Russian literary criticism is in a state of total collapse at the moment. I mean, I don't tend to read that many Russian critics, just because the profession is in such a sort of low ebb in Russia, unfortunately. So these novels are picked up by critics, but they will often be addressed on purely sort of stylistic literary grounds of achievement, rather than necessarily on the message that these authors are trying to bring across. I think what's changed in terms of the impact that these novels have is the fact that so many of these writers are also public figures, like Lyudmila Ulitskaya, and work as activists in the area of mental disability, working in, or themselves have children. I mean, that's Alexander Snegiryov, I think, must be, whose child has Down syndrome in this novel. I think that must be based on autobiographical experience. So I think it's more the personal example of the writers that's having an impact, as well as their texts, rather than the influence of... I mean, that novel, Petroleum Venus, was advertised in Russia as, you can read it in 2 hours. Wonderful. So, that was the main advertising slogan for it.
If I can chime in, I think it was instructive, the critical response to, and I'm blanking on his name, is it Rubén David Gallego? Gallego, who wins the Booker Prize. I believe it was in 2003, 2004?
2004.
Yeah, and there was a great backlash among some critics about whether he was deserving of that award and how the novel was badly, it's considered a novel, but it's actually very autobiographical. How it was badly written, that it was not a worthy subject, that it was kind of a pity choice. And so it was really quite striking that I recall that happening, and just the discourse and how venomous some of it was, precisely on this question of how you're only giving it to him because he's disabled.
Which is absolutely unfair. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fantastically
Well, it's a matter of
innovative
taste.
from a literary point of view book, as well as anything else. I'm sure Irina has things to say about Rubén Gallego's book as well. Can I just make one point, that the book is interesting because it's written by Gallego, who had severe cerebral palsy. But he's not mentally disabled as far as I can understand, but he calls himself in the book a débile, because he says, there's a lot of irony in this book. He plays with the stigma that was attached to the mentally disabled, but clearly he himself is physically disabled, but not in any sense cognitively limited, as far as I can tell.
Да, я хотела добавить, я хотела и про Рубена сказать, и про доклад Хосе.
Yes, I wanted to say a few words about Ruben's book as well as Jose's presentation.
Там вы говорили о Маресе.
You were mentioning Moresiev.
Это история с двойным дном. История с двойным дном.
This is a story with a twist.
Потому что советская пропаганда должна была показать такого вот героя Моресьева.
So the Soviet propaganda had to show such a hero as Moresiev.
Но в жизни те ребята, которые потеряли ноги на войне, высылались из больших городов, вообще высылались, для того, чтобы не портить вид.
But in reality, what was happening in other Soviet cities, those boys, those soldiers who became injured and disabled in the war, they were actually forcefully moved to other smaller cities so that they wouldn't spoil the overall view of a city.
There's even a camp set aside for them.
Да, и
Это был какой-то лагерь. Yes.
Разное
it was a
было.
camp.
Ну, в любом случае, из больших городов.
But it was in different ways, but in any case, they were all moved from the big cities
Вот
in the
та
Soviet Union.
картинка, которую вы показывали, инвалида на самодельной коляске,
One of your slides where you show disabled people in a made-up wheelchair.
ну вот 91 год там был
I
написан.
think it said in the caption said 91, 1991.
Вот я помню таких из своего детства.
I remember those people from my own childhood.
Их было много. Потом
the-
они исчезли.
We saw lots of them and then they overnight
Мое
almost
детство
disappeared.
это были 60-е.
My childhood was in the
И
60s,
больше они никогда не появлялись.
and then I never saw them again.
Вот, поэтому власть была очень жестока по отношению к тем, кто прошел Вторую мировую войну.
So the authorities were, I would say, extremely cruel to those people who were injured in the war.
И, собственно, Моресьев – это доказательство того, что только человек, снова ставший, как они, вот таким же здоровым, он заслуживает внимания.
So Moriesiev is kind of evidence to show that once a disabled person can become as able-bodied as a normal person, then he deserves all the prize.
Все остальные не заслуживают
Every-
такого внимания, участия и жалоб.
But nobody else deserves people's attention or compassion or sympathy.
Вот это я хотела добавить к докладу Хосе.
This is what I just
Спасибо
wanted to
большое.
add.
Теперь я хочу еще, во-первых, поблагодарить Оливера за изумительную презентацию
I would like to thank Oliver for his wonderful presentation
и сказать еще одну вещь о творчестве Людмилы Улицкой.
and also say something about Lyudmila Ulitskaya's work.
Она затеяла и сделала серию книг
Sh-
о толерантности.
She has devised a series of books about tolerance.
Она не была автором, она была редактором этих книг.
She wasn't the author, but she was the editor of the series.
Там эта серия называлась «Другой, другие от других».
The series was called The Other, The Others, and About the Others.
Я тоже написала туда, это серия для детей, для тинейджеров.
This is a series for children, teenagers.
Я написала туда книжку об инвалидах.
I also contributed to the series. I wrote a book about disabled people.
Это для тинейджеров, это самая сложная категория читателей.
Teenagers, I would say, are the most difficult kind of audience
В наше время.
in our time.
Вот там есть книжка, например, в этой серии о людях с нечистотой.
There is a book in the series about people with HIV.
То есть Людмила Евгеньевна поднимает совершенно нетрадиционные для России вопросы и пытается с детского возраста это объяснить.
So Ulitska is addressing non-traditional, non-conventional issues in Russia, and she's trying to educate the younger generation,
Так
raise
сказать,
awareness
она
among the younger
заставила меня
generation.
написать.
She actually forced me to contribute to the series with this
Ну,
book.
вот мою эту историю болезни.
So this is my story of my illness.
Она позвонила и сказала, давай каждый напишет о своей болезни.
So she called me and say, okay, let's each of us let's write about our own illness.
А у нее тогда была онкология.
At the time, she had cancer,
Мы вместе с тобой ее издали.
and she said, okay, we'll publish them together.
Вы понимаете, да, опубликоваться под одной обложкой с улиц.
You know, to me, it was an honor to be published under the same
Ради этого
cover.
я могла написать все, что угодно.
I could have written anything,
Вот, и я села и написала.
so I did.
Но Улицкая, поскольку она лечилась от своего рака, она ничего не написала.
But Ulitska actually didn't end up writing anything because she was undergoing treatment for cancer at the time.
И я оказалась вот с готовым текстом, но без соавтора.
So I ended up with a book, but without my co-author.
Вот, собственно, это история появления моей.
So this is how my book came out, actually.
Вот, я вспоминаю там о Рубене Галье, который большую роль сыграл в моем
Also, in the book I mentioned Ruben Gallego, who played a huge part in my life.
Я тоже сыграла роль в его жизни.
But I think I also played a part in his.
Потому что спонсором Букеровской премии, когда Рубен ее получил, была открытая Россия.
Because one of the sponsors of the
Вот, not one, единственный.
the only sponsor of the prize was Открытая Россия.
И, ну, в общем, я приложила кое-какие усилия, чтобы именно Рубен получил.
I did actually had to pull some strings so that Ruben would receive the prize.
Потому что писатели говорили, ну это же не роман, это серия рассказов.
Because all the other writers were saying it's not actually a novel, it's just a series of short stories.
Букеровская премия – это премия за лучший роман.
The Booker Prize is an award given to best
Я
novel
была хорошим
for best novel.
дипломатом.
But I think I'm a good diplomat.
Все думали, что я тут ни при чем.
So everybody else thought that I had no part in this.
Okay, let's take another couple of questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Martin Dewhurst, University of Glasgow. I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't yet heard anything this afternoon about Nikolai Ostrovsky's Как закалялась сталь, how the steel was tempered. I was given a copy of this over half a century ago by a visiting Soviet journalist, and I read it, and I wonder whether people as young as Irina had to read it at school, whether it had any effect on them.
I'm not so young. I
Yeah.
finished school and university in
Yeah.
Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So I read all these books and Nikolai Ostrovsky also. And then I recognized then Nikolai Ostrovsky had something like multiple sclerosis. Not exactly, but something like that. So I read it.
Because I was wondering whether, to take Irina, whether it had any real effect on her, because she was saying in another place yesterday that she was not really aware of the problem of physically challenged people until, well, even in the 1970s. It was only later. In other words, this propaganda work by Ostrovsky may not have had any effect at all on the masses of Soviet people. I'd be very interested in what the three experts could say about the impact of Nikolai Ostrovsky on moods towards physically challenged people in Stalin's time.
Thank you, Martin. Can we take one more question and then we'll come back to our panel?
Thanks. Anne Lewis Bear Trust. I come at the subject from a completely opposite angle, if I may say so. It seems to me if we're looking at how attitudes are affected by portrayals of disability, which is the subject of our seminar, probably the popular arts are more influential than the fine arts. That's perhaps stretching our subject a little bit, but I would be very interested to know from Irina or anybody else what modern television makes of disabled people, whether they appear in sitcoms or plays or otherwise, and if so, how that is received by the popular audience.
Thank you. Can we start with Oliver?
I don't think I have much to answer. It's not the area of my expertise, certainly how Ostrovsky's novel was taken up by later writers. And I think you mentioned Как закалялась сталь in your book, I think.
No.
You don't?
It's
No.
Gallego does.
Gallego does,
It's
right,
actually a
okay.
big part of the book. In how he kind of formulates.
The idea of heroism,
Yes.
and that you shouldn't have pity. I mean, Gallego takes a very
Yeah.
жесткая позиция, a
Yeah.
very, very firm position about, you know, I was born as this
As a
terrible
hero.
condition, and I need to be a hero to
Yeah.
get over it. And he doesn't want anybody's pity. And I wonder, well, this is an answer to the question, but I do wonder whether Irina, you share his
No.
No, I imagine you
No,
don't.
at
I mean,
all.
there's this meeting in your book
No,
where you
we
seem to have
told,
different opinions.
And, my position is absolutely different. We need to be, we need to beat it,
Beat it.
of course. Because, yes, the man like Ruben is hero. And I know thousands of such heroes in Russia. And everybody from this south are very, very weak inside. And they want to be with somebody who is warm. Like me, I know that I like to be surrounded by people who help me, who tell me that some warm words. It's normal. And Ruben is Soviet person from such point. Because in Soviet Union to be weak, it was very bad. Sorry for my English. And in modern Russia, I am absolutely sure that we must create a passion for
Trust.
And sincere, to be sincere, and to be pity about somebody, to help each other. And people in the time when Ruben was grew up in Soviet детский дом for disabled persons, it was my childhood also. I am 4 years older than Ruben. And if somebody tell me that in child houses in regions somebody needs help, I was very surprised. Because I was sure, like ordinary Soviet girl, that our big and strong state take care about everybody. Absolutely everybody. And now people, thousands of young people know you that no, our state can do nothing. And the movement of volunteers are developed in very high speed, with very high speed. And the amount of students who are going to the regional child houses or regional houses for elder people are very big. And even 5 years ago, it was impossible. But now we have a lot of people. And Ruben never take part in this. People, persons such as Ruben, because he is really strong. But he tried to be even strong than he is.
And of course he doesn't live in Russia.
Of course, he is living in the United States, so it's much more comfortable. But
That's
Jose, do you want to add?
Well, I was just going to say to add about Gallego, he's a fascinating figure, but that it's a very telling thing that his own answer to part of his self-fulfillment and self-realization, you know, with the publication of the book and everything, is precisely to leave Russia. It's actually it's to find it somewhere else because he won't find it under those conditions culturally, socially.
What about Anne's question about television? Do you want to comment on that?
Women in the television.
I'm sorry to say, maybe Elena, maybe someone else can comment on that. I'm not very aware off the top of my head, unfortunately, about television.
I'm trying to be on television on my wheelchair as far as I know, as I can. But it's a problem because I am in a position to put regime. So I am not invited. Meanwhile, I am expert in economics and disabled people questions and so on and so on. But sometimes I am on television, and I'm trying to tell to our TV directors of all channels that they need to have some heroes in these stupid serials. Also, people with disabilities. But sometimes very rare. Somebody take part, like an actor who played a role. Yes? То есть актер, который играет роль инвалида.
So it's just an actor, a non-disabled person who plays a disabled person.
Такой случается очень редко.
That happens very rarely.
И они все
And they all get cured in the end, and this is true.
Could
They
I-
all get cured in the end.
Irina, I wonder whether this is to do with, I mean, I remember my time living in Russia, there's such skepticism about political correctness, and that therefore maybe the televisions fear that the audience would think that this was some kind of political correctness to have a disabled person in a soap opera.
Это вообще-то замкнутый круг, где не знаешь, где начало,
A
где
vicious
конец.
circle.
Кто виляет хвостом, да,
Мгм.
собака или он виляет собаку?
I don't know
Who's
whether
wagging the
they-
dog? Yeah.
Вообще, честно говоря, для России понятие политической корректности немножко преувеличено.
I think in Russia, the notion of political correctness is slightly exaggerated.
Это настолько 10-го уровня проблем.
It's not actually a big problem in Russia. It's not considered to be an issue.
То есть, когда есть реальные проблемы, вот чуть-чуть не может выйти из дома.
So we have real problems on the one hand, like a disabled person can't leave their home.
Это девочка из Костромы, да, талантливая художница, обреченная.
Like for example, this painter I told you about from Kostroma who can't leave her house.
Вот, поэтому.
So
Thank you. We've got time for another round of questions. So,
I actually have 3 examples. So
yeah,
from TV, do you want to
Denise, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, can I?
And I might have one actually too. Maybe we have the same.
With the microphone.
Denise is American
I'm sorry, but
woman
that was my
who is watcher of Russian television.
Well, recently there have actually been some interesting programs, and there's a program called Factor A, and in fact the only reason why I watched it because I saw all of a sudden I was turning the channels and I noticed a young woman with a disability in a wheelchair and she was singing, and this was all in Facebook, and she has been one of her mentor is Alla Pugacheva, who's a very famous performer in Russia, and she's going to continue to be on the program. And I thought it was a very positive media coverage of this, of her. She's very sweet, and I mean we don't really see her personality yet, but she's cute. She's from another city. She's not from Moscow. She's from Ukhta, which is in the northwest. So I think that's a positive example, and we'll see how that proceeds. And then I know that some of the other shows, like when they have stars coming, or people from the community, I don't remember what they're called. You know, those shows when they bring in different people who perform. I know there have been blind performers, so they have brought in people with disabilities to perform. So it seems like they're kind of trying to make an effort to bring people into some of these programs. But also recently I saw a series where a boy had an accident. He was in a wheelchair, and of course in the end, the goal was for him to walk. So that's very common as well.
I was also just going to say very briefly is that one person who actually has been appearing in interviews in the media for years, actually, and it has become actually quite prominent more in recent years is Vladimir Sorokin, the writer who stutters. And what's interesting is how his stammering kind of is usually, it's not edited out, especially when it's on television. And I thought that he's been able to kind of control his stuttering better in recent years, but it is an example of someone with what some might call a social disability.
Are there one or two more questions from the floor? Yes, gentleman here.
Mr. Rowan Simpson. I cut.
Would you like to have the microphone?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks. I can't help but make the obvious remark that increased access to certainly up to physically handicapped people would lead the way towards a greater acceptance generally. I was working on these problems in the 70s, and access to theatres and cinemas and art centres in particular. And we felt strategically that the physical aspects of access certainly led the way to a far greater acceptance and a far greater integration of every spiritual aspect of the handicapped and the able-bodied. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very interesting point about. Perhaps I could ask Irina to comment on this question of physical access for the disabled in Moscow and elsewhere.
Ну, это важнейшая часть проблемы.
It's a very, very important part of the
Потому
problem.
что понять, что инвалиды есть, можно только если они будут появляться во всех общественных местах.
Because you can only understand that the disabled people exist once you start seeing them in the street.
Почему я говорила про то, что я никогда не отказываюсь появляться на телевидении, даже в дурацких программах.
That's why I was saying earlier that I never actually turn down TV appearances, even though the programs may be a little bit silly.
Просто потому, что я на инвалидном кресле должна быть там, и люди должны видеть, что человек на инвалидном кресле, он хороший эксперт там в других вопросах.
And also the fact that I'm in a wheelchair, and I think it's important for people to see that disabled people can be experts in other issues, like, for example, economics or...
Я хочу сказать, что у инвалидов тоже есть проблема, они привыкли сидеть дома.
There is another side of this issue. The problem that the disabled people have themselves is that they've got used to staying at home.
Вот мы проводили уже 4 раза в Москве такие прогулки на инвалидных колясках по городу.
So it's 4 times we've now done this. We've done like walks with disabled people in their wheelchairs in Moscow.
Причем мы приглашали здоровых артистов популярных, которые садились на инвалидные коляски и ехали вместе с нами.
So what we did as well, we asked popular actors to also sit in wheelchairs and have a walk with us.
But no people on wheelchair, except one or two of them, took part with us. It's for us, for them. This activity is very important, extremely important for them, but no participation.
How far do you think they say why?
Они сказали, почему они отказались.
Тяжело, далеко ехать.
They said it's too far. It was too far to go to.
But there is only ways.
Well, that might seem a little harsh. I mean, is there some sense in which maybe there was some fear, or there maybe some repercussions of this, or something like that?
Может быть, они чего-то боялись, может быть, каких-то последствий боялись, если они присоединятся к вам или что-то.
Ну, нельзя бороться за права, боясь потерять что-то, там какие-то блага.
You can't make an omelet without breaking the eggs.
Вот объяснить, что борьба за права, она не всегда, точнее, никогда не бывает такой абсолютно безопасной.
When you fight for somebody's rights, in this case for the disabled people's rights, it's not always going to be safe. It will never be that safe.
И надо сказать, что после первой нашей прогулки на нас так называемые so-called official, официальные инвалиды просто страшно накинулись. Ну вот официальные инвалиды это люди, которые получают, ну, являются там председателем общества инвалидов.
After our first walk, we've had criticism from so-called official disabled people. And by official disabled people, I mean people who are, for example, a chairperson of a disabled people's society or something like that.
They told that me, why? It's not the truth. Our Moscow government do a lot, and you never can claim. And so on. No.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of our time for this panel. We're now going to break for half an hour for tea and coffee. And I'll ask you to be back here by 3:45 for the next panel. But please, can you give a warm thank you to our three speakers?